Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core. More specifically, the sort of half remake, half remaster it got in 2022. For those unaware, this is a prequel to the original Final Fantasy VII, where you play as Zack, an overconfident Shinra soldier. If you've played the first part of Final Fantasy VII Remake, you will have seen Zack appear at the end of the game, and at the Thailand game show late last year, Hamaguchi stated that Zack will play an important role as a major character in Rebirth. So, in this video, I'm going to explain why you should play Crisis Core before the next remake part releases. So, since this is a remake of a PSP game no less, we'll just go over a few of the changes to start things off. The game features the same story as the original, no major retconning or anything like that. The voice lines have allegedly been re-recorded, which is pretty cool. It's got a new soundtrack and updated menu UI to more closely match the 7 remake. There's also a few new changes to combat which make it match more closely with the remake, but we'll touch more on that in just a second. We're going to go through the game on its own first, then finish off by discussing why I feel playing Crisis Core before Rebirth will be essential. But now, for the combat. The combat controls have been altered somewhat to be closer to the remake's combat, and you can feel the similarities here. It's real-time combat with a tactical edge, with really nice flow and very strong feedback. The sounds of your attacks hitting enemies feel satisfying, and there's a rewarding loop involved in using your abilities to efficiently take down enemies. Completing battles without taking damage, or killing enemies with specific abilities, gives you a percentage of your health, MP and AP back to you. This not only encourages you to experiment more with your materia and be less stingy, but it adds an extra incentive to otherwise regular encounters. I've played quite a few JRPGs before, and I've never really liked the random encounter aspect of them. But with this game, I relished them. There wasn't a single moment in this game where I was tired of fighting. The materia system always adds a lot of options. It's one of my favourite Final Fantasy gimmicks really. You level up your materia just by having them equipped, not even necessarily using them in battle. You can also fuse different materia together to make new ones, so there is room for experimentation. But this isn't a necessary thing to do. You can also create different materia sets, something I did a couple times for certain boss battles, although unless I missed it, you can't switch sets in battle, which I feel would have been cool, although there is definitely an argument to be made that that would then be overpowered, as you wouldn't have to put any thought into which materia you take into battle with you. There's also the standard Final Fantasy thing, some enemies are weak to different elemental materia, and will take them down with ease if you use them. Some best with AP attacks, for example, the usual jazz. There's also the DMW, which you will be able to see in the top left of almost all of the gameplay in this, which adds a fun randomised feel to things. There's a sort of slot machine constantly going off in the corner, which can give you buffs in game depending on how they roll. This could be something small, such as a temporary defense buff or short window where you can use magic without using up MP, or something much larger such as a limit break or even a summon. This is a really cool way of adding these elements in that could have easily been lost with the switch from turn-based in the original Final Fantasy to Crisis Core's real-time combat. You can earn more summons and limit breaks from the side missions, and there is a hell of a lot of side missions. This game is around, if you bursted through the main story, I'd say it's around 10 hours long, but you could easily quadruple that with all this side content. It is absolutely insane. A lot of them are very boring missions where it just kind of go here and kill this, but they do offer some really cool rewards, and you should definitely at the very least do the ones that give you the summons and the extra accessory slots. You can even level up your Buster Sword by switching to battle stance in combat, giving you an extra avenue to deal damage and an additional avenue for progression. I didn't realise how battle stance worked until almost a full chapter after it's introduced, so I was quite a bit behind in my progression of it for quite a while, but I still found it really engaging trying to level up the sword by using it, because the damage it does in some bosses is really a lifesaver. The game also features a bunch of boss battles, which most chapters usually featuring around 2, and I wouldn't say a lot of these are overly challenging, but they keep you on your toes. It's how boss battles should work for the most part. It's about recognising attack patterns and countering that with what you've got. It's a really nice flow. The boss fights were some of the best moments in the game, although I will say that, without spoiling anything, the fight that a lot of people would have been most excited for if they'd played the original 7 is a tad underwhelming here. One mechanic I absolutely hate in gaming is insta-deaths. I think that they're cheap and add fake challenge to games. This game does have a few of them in the latter chapters specifically, and some of the side missions, usually in bosses as well. I'm vehemently against insta-death as a concept, but it doesn't happen enough in this game to be a real issue. Honestly, I just really love the combat in this game, more than I expected to if I'm being honest. There's a lot of systems in place and they work really well together. Now on to the story. Crisis Core is a prequel to the original Final Fantasy VII, and you play as Zack Fair, working as a soldier at Shinra with some familiar faces, such as Song and of course Sephiroth. The likes of Cloud, Aerith and Tifa do also show up in small doses, although Aerith does play a very strong role in Zack's characterization and development. Zack begins the game demonstrably talented, but immature and cocky, lacking the discipline required in order to reach his full potential. When the events of the game unfold, he does grow into his role and keeps his morals and honour intact in the face of adversity. It's a tried and tested coming of age story, and it is a pretty enjoyable one, mostly due to Zack having a lot of personality and generally just being fun to play as and listen to. He's easy to root for and you want him to accomplish his goals. The voice acting in the game isn't great if I'm being completely honest, and I feel like that's kind. It's quite wooden and almost always feels like it's being read by someone that's giving a presentation who's panicking and is just reading off the screen.
Why do you use it to cause evil?
Is it wrong to spread happiness through Mako energy?
It picks up in the climactic moments a little bit, and you do feel some of Zack's emotions come through his voice, but general dialogue feels a bit meh and is a pretty big low point for the game. There are a couple of quiet chapters as well where not a lot of action is happening, and these are the two worst chapters in the game, and they are chapter 4 and chapter 7. 4 is where Zack meets Aerith, which is nice, and watching their relationship grow is endearing, but you spend like half of the chapter searching for a pickpocket and it is such a pace killer. Obviously it serves a purpose in the grander narrative, it grounds Zack a lot, which was necessary for him to develop, and his relationship with Aerith is also important to not only his own development, but also into adding more context to Aerith's character that we didn't have before. Chapter 7 is basically building a flower cart for Aerith and just spending time with her before we go off on our final mission, which again is nice and a cool nod to the start of Final Fantasy VII, but it was still boring to play. Final Fantasy in general has always suffered with pacing, especially in last year's 16 where the pacing was atrocious, and I do generally have a high tolerance for this kind of stuff, and have sat through a lot worse. But it's just worth mentioning since the game is 10 chapters long and 2 of them are so light on meaningful gameplay. I did like the story in general, though it did lose me in a few instances. The start of the game is really cool, the first few chapters are very strong, trying to figure out what's going on with Zack's mentor Angeal, who is brilliant by the way, working with Sephiroth to find the truth, and when you're playing with the context of knowing more about She-Ra than Zack does, it's classic dramatic irony and it's really cool. But I do have doubts as to whether I'd have enjoyed this story as much on its own. It relies heavily on the assumption you've played Final Fantasy VII before, which is fine because you should have, given that Crisis Core is a prequel to Final Fantasy VII, and also just because Final Fantasy VII is one of the best games of all time, hello. It's not a complaint as such, but it's worth pointing out that Cloud doesn't do much in this game. That is fine and all, I kind of expected that, it is Zack's game. But I don't know, I just kind of expected him to do more. He's just kind of there, which, as I said, I guess is fine. A lot of the story I do feel is lazily structured in points and is very inconsistently paced, but I still enjoyed it as a fan of Final Fantasy and a fan of Final Fantasy VII. I know you're probably not watching this video if you haven't at least played the first part of 7 Remake, but if you are, definitely at least play that first, but do yourself a favour and play the original 7 anyway, because it's great. Now, this part of the video is going to be speaking about major spoilers for the ending of this game, so skip to the time appearing on screen now, to be safe, you have been warned. So, Crisis Core obviously has a really emotional ending, with Zack's final stand reminding me somewhat of Halo Reach, when you know it's only a matter of time until the enemies will take you down. Zack said right at the start of the game that all he wanted was to be a hero, and he stayed true to that philosophy until the end, with the final line of the game being, "Would you say I became a hero?" It's enough to bring a tear to a man's eye, it really is. The goal of any prequel is to add to the source material, and this game does that, with it adding extra weight to Cloud's character in 7. Cloud tells Zack he'll be his living legacy, as he screams over Zack's lifeless body. How sad. Given the ending of the first part of 7 Remake showing that there is a universe where Zack survives his final showdown, it's safe to assume he will play a role in Rebirth. Welcome back to the spoiler avoiders. Given everything I just mentioned in the spoiler zone, and when you then combine this with Hamaguchi's comments I referenced at the start of the video, and the fact that the Crisis Core remake probably wouldn't exist in the first place otherwise, Zack will almost definitely play a vital role in Rebirth. Given how the first part of Remake showed that they're not afraid to deviate from the original story, there's a lot of variables and a lot of it is up in the air. Most of all of Zack's appearance in the game will alter Cloud and Aerith specifically, and even more loosely Sephiroth. I was already excited for Rebirth, but that excitement has absolutely been heightened by playing Crisis Core. It's essentially speculation at this point, but I think you'd be missing valuable context for Rebirth if you did miss Crisis Core Reunion. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. I hope that you did enjoy it. If you did, then please consider leaving a like, as that would be greatly appreciated by me. And if you want to see more videos from me, then you could always consider subscribing, because I upload every single week. But for now, that is all from me. Have a nice day, and goodbye.
You too.